Hey guys, Turk here. I hope you're having a great day. It's been several weeks since the all-digital CES 2021, and I've been getting a whole bunch of questions from you guys regarding the Intel press release and about the 11th generation processors. Is the 11900K going to be actually better than the 10900K, or should we just, hold our horses and just wait for some of those precious 5900Xs to come back in stock? Well, we got a bunch of good news in that press conference, but a bit of bad news. But in today's video, we're going to be unraveling all the details and giving you guys a sneak peek as to the performance we should be expecting for gaming, as well as a little bit of application performance. As we said before, there was a lot of information that was dropped in the Intel press conference during CES the past couple weeks, and we got a lot of information when it comes to their laptop releases this year, as well as their latest and greatest going to the desktop platform. And in today's video, we're going to be focusing on the latter. Now, as for the bad news, they did give us some performance numbers, and as much as I like to say it, the numbers really weren't all that helpful. Let's pull it up here. Let's zoom in this chart real quick. Whoa, not that zoom. Zoom it out a little bit. Zoom a little bit more. There, perfect, cool. So here we are, we're looking at Intel's performance charts when it comes to the 11900K, and they're going to be comparing it against the AMD 5900X, which is putting the flagships of the flagships against one another. And on the surface, this chart looks really promising and we're getting some pretty good numbers out of it. But as I said in my Intel Day 1 CES review, these numbers just aren't all that persuasive. So let's take a look at the chart here. So down there at the bottom, we've got all the different subnotes. And one thing you'll notice is that all of these games are going to be played at 1080p. Now, this is a classic resolution that's used when we're doing CPU benchmarks in order to get the GPU out of the way and showcase just how powerful these processors are. But when you're talking about flagships, you're typically not gaming at 1080p unless you're going for the highest frame rates possible, as in like esports, or if there's just that big of a CPU bottleneck in your game and you just need that extra horsepower. Another thing to keep in mind with these little subnotes is the different detail settings that they're using. You'll notice here on the far right that they're actually using Assassin's Creed Valhalla with 1080p very high, and then on the left we've got some ultras, we've got some other highs. And on the surface that's all good, but I've played a bunch of these games, and some of these detail settings are not the highest setting out there, and they're actually, a mix between the middle and middle to high. But we're going to dive through each of these games today and dissect each of the frames per second we should be expecting from the games. I will be referencing a lot of different resources out there and hopefully trying to help connect the dots towards the performance we should expect from the 11900K. So starting us off on the left side of the screen is going to be Total War 3 Kingdoms. Now, I don't have this game, so I'm going to be leveraging Gamers Nexus's 5900X review, where they're actually going to be testing pretty much pinpointed right on the dot with what Intel is showing. They are going to be running 32 gigs of RAM at 3200 DDR4. They're also running an RTX 3080, and they've got all of these different processors just the way we like it, stock speeds. It's going to be a great example of what to look at. But now let's actually start to look at the charts. So we're going to look at the percentage relative improvement when it comes to the different processors. And sure enough, we see a huge variety of performance numbers here, suggesting that this is a very CPU intensive game. So on the 3950X, the previous generation AMD processor, is down at the bottom with about 80% relative performance compared to the 5900X. And sure enough, the 11900K right up there with 108% on the relative performance. That's when the good news stops and the bad news starts to show. If we convert that back into the raw FPS numbers at these test points, we start to see that between the lowest and the 5900X, we're seeing only a 40 FPS jump. But guys, we're above 144 FPS here. Is that 41 FPS really going to matter? And going all the way up to the 11900K, is that extra 20 FPS going to actually matter for anything? And let's also keep in context here the game, Total War 3 Kingdoms. Do we care that it's a high refresh rate game? I don't think it is, of course. Let me know down in the comments what the gameplay is like. But to me, this is not a very compelling stat as much as it looks like it's a great value and a great performance win for Intel. So let's look at the next game. I've had to kind of dig around on the internet for multiple different sources because a lot of people are using overclocked CPUs when they're doing their GPU reviews, and other people are using different types of detail settings. So I've been having to pick and choose data, but I have been able to prove the 5900X and the 10700K data here because I've got access to that on my system, and the 3200 DDR4 as well as the RTX 3080. So I'm pretty confident with those numbers, and you can take the rest with a grain of salt. But here we go, guys. Relative performance compared to the 5900X. Sure enough, we're going to be getting that 5% performance improvement, but I hate to tell it to you, but Intel, you've got a part that already gets 4% performance improvement compared to the 5900X. So I don't really think that's a good selling point here. And then again, if we plug that in and put in the raw performance numbers, we are again already above 100 hertz on all these different processors with this particular graphics card. And unless you're really trying to unlock that 144 hertz, each of these processors is plenty capable of that. So having that 5% is not really that big of a deal. And also, to add salt to the injury, between the 5900X and the 11900K, it's only 7 frames per second, guys. In this instance, that might even be considered within the margin of error. So I don't know if that's really worth it. Now, Metro Exodus is a really good looking game. I am going to be leveraging Paul's Hardware's data here. Now, there are a couple caveats when it comes to his data. He is testing this game at the ultra settings when it comes to the detail settings with Metro Exodus. So I actually did have to do a little bit of back work in order to get these numbers to match better. And sure enough, when you go from high to ultra, you do lose about 20 FPS. So if we want to stay true to the Intel numbers here, you probably want to shift all of these performance metrics to the right a little bit. But relative performance should still be in the same ballpark. Again, I'm starting to echo myself a little bit. We're not seeing that big of a performance improvement going from the 5900X to the 11900X. And I hate to break it to you guys, but the 10900K is still the better processor when we're looking at the raw performance metrics. And again, it just goes to show you that Intel's really struggling to provide a processor that actually makes sense in the gaming marketplace. Now, Cyberpunk 2077 is a brand new game out there, and there's not a lot of consensus as to the best way to actually benchmark this thing. So I'm only going to be sticking to my benchmarking loop. All of this data is collected by me, so I'm pretty confident in it. It's a very CPU intensive game, and we are starting to see that the lower FPS numbers are not going to be giving us as good of raw FPS performance improvement. Here we go. 5900X, we're going to be getting 100% performance and only getting 4% with the 11900K. That's not that good. And if we put that into the raw performance, that's 4 frames per second, guys, going from 107 to 111 FPS. That's not great. I don't know if anyone can actually tell. And especially in this particular game where they're doing the benchmark, you could get a much higher frame rates when the sun's up, or you might be getting better frame rates if you're just staring at a wall. So I'm just not impressed with what Intel's got to show us here. Watchdog Legions is another one of those new games that's out there, and I unfortunately don't have this game just yet, so I'm going to be leveraging Hardware Unbox's data. But for their CPU comparisons that they've been doing, they've upgraded their test bench to the RTX 3090, which is going to give us over optimistic FPS values. So if you want to keep that in mind, you would want to shift all these performance numbers to the left a bit. Granted, I'm not exactly sure how much more you would need to shift it to the left, but the relative performance should be still right on track with what Intel is showing here. But guys, we're beating a dead horse here. The 5900X, we're having it at 100% relative performance. Going to the 11900K, 104%. That's not good. Translating that into raw FPS numbers, we can at least, give a shining gold star and A for effort here. They're actually able to get 120 FPS on average at 1080p. But guys, their 10900K is only shy by 3 FPS. And then a bunch of these other processors that have been on the market for quite a while, they're not that far behind. Far Cry New Dawn. Now, there is supposed to be a new Far Cry game coming out here in 2021, but for now, we're going to have to rely on New Dawn. And again, this is going to be from Hardware Unboxed. Again, RTX 3090. So expect to shift the data to the left if you're going to be looking at the RTX 3080. And again, we're seeing really close performance across the board, going straight to the raw FPS. Again, guys, this is actually really shocking. The 10700K, the 8-core last generation processor, is actually faster than the flagship processor coming from Intel. That might just be the nail in the coffin for Intel, guys. We're going to cover the rest of the charts here, especially the single-threaded performance. It's going to come up here in a bit. Bringing us home today is going to be Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and this data is only going to be collected by me. I wasn't able to find really any good media outlets that had access to the very high detail setting, so I went ahead and got it set up on my test bench, and sure enough, the 11900K is, again, beaten by the 10700K. Unless there's some extra tweaking that's coming from Intel, I'm not impressed. 4 FPS separates the 5900X with the 10700K. So if all of that gaming performance got you kind of depressed and not looking forward to Intel's next generation processors, we do have a silver lining on this cloud, and that is actually the proposed IPC and performance improvements. Now, no data has actually been revealed by Intel. We have seen a couple leaks across the internet, but what we've been told is they are aiming for a 19% performance improvement. And if you guys have got a good memory, that's exactly the same IPC improvement that we were getting from going from Zen 2 to Zen 3 with the AMD 5000 series processors. So using some of that knowledge, I'm actually going to dig into some of my previous historic data and try and see if we can predict what the single-threaded performance is going to look like for these 11th gen 11900K parts. Now, again, guys, these are all estimates. It's all purely math. We still don't have any information from Intel, so these are all subject to change. Take it with a grain of salt. So let's get to it. I think for our comparisons today, the 11900K is going to be more analogous to the 10700K, which is why I've included it in all these charts. And that's where we're going to be basing all of our numbers off of. So as we see with Cinebench R20 single-threaded score, we're going to basically be taking that 10700K value and multiplying it and uplifting it by that, 16 to 19%, which is what we actually expected with AMD and got from AMD. And sure enough, I do expect to see that the Intel parts are going to be competitive against the AMD parts, especially in Cinebench R20. If we want to take the same learning and apply it to Geekbench 4, we do see some pretty decent scaling when it comes to thread performance, and the Intel part should be able to take the crown there in that specific benchmark. It's really hard to take these metrics and apply them to some of the more scientific or application time-sensitive workloads, but I did see some pretty consistent results with Y-Cruncher. That's where we actually go and calculate pi. And sure enough, if we plug in the same 19%, I think I actually use 16% here, we do see that we are able to beat the 8-core 5800X that we created in our previous videos. And guys, it almost gives me some hope that this 8-core part is going to be competitive against some of the other 8-core parts that are on the market. And that's what it boils down to with my recommendations, y'all. If this 8-core part is only competitive with other 8-core parts, it kind of makes sense to just wait for other parts to actually come into stock when it comes to the 5900X, or if you're even wanting to go with the 10900K, because with those 2 to 4 extra cores, you are going to get a much better experience when it comes to encodes, compilation times, or any kind of workstation tasks. I really don't think this 8-core processor is going to fit the bill for you, but if it comes to games, you are going to get a better experience for a relative term, but it's just not going to be that much more better. So there's only a couple instances where I would actually pick up the 11th gen processors, and that would be if I've got an older Intel processor like an i7 8700K or a 9900K, because getting that additional IPC from the different generations and the frequency boosts is going to be a much better gaming experience. And I do believe having access to Gen 4 PCIe as well as DDR4 3200 right out of the box, that's going to be a great value, especially if you're going to pair that up with the latest graphics cards that are coming out from AMD and NVIDIA. But if you already have a Ryzen 3000, or if you've already invested in the 10900Ks, it might be best just to hold off or wait until the 5900X comes in stock, because the only real improvement you're going to be getting is that Generation 4 PCIe or the increased memory data rates. But honestly, that just doesn't make sense. And these parts just aren't impressive enough to make me go and click that buy now button. You know what I'm saying? So guys, that's my video, short and sweet. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you hit the bell icon and subscribe down below because we've got some more cool content coming out. Hopefully we're gonna get our hands on these Z590s here in a couple weeks. And then also we've got to finish off that Pro Siphon air cooler. I've been waiting to finish testing on that for quite a while now. I'm waiting on MSI to fix a freaking bug with their software in order to finish that testing. So make sure you hit the subscribe button. It's gonna be a good one. But thank you, Turk Force, for watching the video. Hope you'll have a great night. Catch you in the next one.